Good morning, everyone.
Malcolm and I have been discussing regarding the development of a case study from a recent Crown of Thorns Starfish project we've both been involved in as co-design co-leads that aim to explore reef traditional owner values and assessments of how these values can inform and support decision-making across Crown of Thorns Starfish
Research and management. Firstly, as always, Malcolm and I extend warm wishes and acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the lands upon which we come to share knowledge. We welcome the thanks and invitation to the season of Nyangal and Clinton Brewer and Uncle Pop Dylan, the acknowledgement there for their welcome to country for us here on these lands. So thank you for that. We also extend warm wishes and acknowledge the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders and Reef Traditional Owners present in the room today. Certainly it's nice for the work that we wanted to talk about today on Darumbal Country to have Bob Jr. and Harry here from Wappabara. It's nice to know that their voice was part of the project understanding, and to have that visibility here is important. We honour your elders, past, present and emerging, and believe the ideas we contribute today will continue to support the aspirations of Indigenous people seeking those economic, educational, social engagements that lead towards self-determination and the Indigenous futures we want for our children, and the impact of those contributions to the legacies that we continue along. In listing the co-design partners for this project, we also acknowledge Ani Mari Shipton, Dabba Elder, and certainly her representation from Tamika, who was able to get one of those Indigenous fellowships. Dabba and Ani Mari, they supported another small project, and for those of you here who are familiar, we presented on that earlier this year at a different reef symposium. And certainly, but for today, the presentation focuses on our Darumbal co-design partners and the little case study that we wanted to share. But then within this space, certainly I also acknowledge the co-authors of this project as listed, and also Ms. Tia Dinnerville, our Indigenous Research Assistant, who entered into the reef space through a cadetship on this Crown of Thorns Starfish project. And it's important and quite special to have her here to celebrate in this space of working not only with Indigenous co-led research, but Indigenous employed staff working on research, and our Indigenous co-design partners sharing in the space to make visible some of the important work that we've been able to do over the last couple of years. This presentation today will highlight the institutional context and the rub, which resulted in some conversations this year Malcolm and I had when we began to discuss the development of a paper, but also broadly on how we could consider relationships that could voice reef traditional owner perspectives on the way programmed reef research and management operates across the reef, and how relational awareness is exercised to include reef traditional owners into research program logics to participate, advise and contribute understanding as part of the decision support mechanism. For those of you who are not aware, the Crown of Thorns Starship project that I'm speaking about was part of a collaborative institutional-led research program, CSIP, which concluded this year, and it was part of a 4-year funding and research timeline arc, which I'll speak to introduce the Darumbal ideas that we want to share here. And it was for our project, CSIP RO9, we were exploring the question of how the aspirations of reef traditional owners who seek meaningful engagement with COTS could be understood, and how those contributions could support broader decision-making, governance and management approaches to reef prioritisation across the reef. So through an integrative and collaborative pragmatic approach, traditional owner knowledge would also be part of understanding reef sites as part of a reef prioritisation approach, and how that could potentially inform other research projects, all tasked with developing understanding of early prediction, detection and response to COTS predation in areas deemed to be high-value reefs. And this was through some really interesting work in discussions with Sam Matthew around ecological, economic and cultural value, and how we could support those particular variables in determining that prioritisation process. The CSIP program, as part of beginning here the content, developing this context, the timeline arc also usefully helps to illustrate the different milestones and accountabilities that all projects negotiate as part of the broader program deliverables, as much as the individual project milestones listed in initial project work plans and design documents, aims and objectives, achieved their own individual goals. Overlaid, for the sake of today, are the key moments that involved Indigenous specific experiences that helped shape our perspectives to deliver something to you all today, but also to come to understand our scholarly arguments, to focus on the notion of relationships. We started asking what are the relationships in the context of program logics, timelines, research governance strategies, and research project expectations. CSIP R09 at the outset foregrounded the need to explore what we mean by meaningful relationships with traditional owners in seed country contexts, by highlighting when Indigenous researchers were employed, when co-design partners joined the project, when workshops were held with traditional owners on country, when ethics approvals were sought and approved. A picture of different layers begin to emerge as part of our reflections on this notion of meaningful relationships. In this space, the second half of this presentation, through Malcolm's voice, will elaborate on these layers. But at the outset, the project spent 19, 20, 24 months on building relationships with potential reef traditional owner co-design partners, making things visible, trying to impart a level of relevance, a relationality to the kind of priorities that the CSIP R09 wanted to achieve in that space, but then also maintaining relationships when during that process of building relationships, overlaying that with maintaining relationships with the reef traditional owners. A period of designing relationships, but also sustaining relationships. The significant challenge is that this relational process occurred simultaneously and concurrently, with each reef traditional owner participant embedded in a different layer at a different starting point throughout that time. And this is also relevant to individual researchers and co-leads within the space, but also different institutional spaces, the project, the program logic, and obviously the broader timeline, knowing that there were also key milestones within that space as well to be able to understand. So complementary to that inward focus that I just touched on building relationship with reef traditional owners, the project also required an outward-looking focus to support the relational gaps with reef traditional owners, a whole of program logic identified across the timeline when things were revealed that who was the point of contact for reef traditional owners. We know someone in CSIP 09, let's get in touch with that project to see if they can support the whole of program logic. As I mentioned there, arguably being the only project with Indigenous researchers embedded into the project, in some ways we switched between this moment of being disempowered by an outward focus to bridge and stopgap relational priorities, to empower broader program logics, and then switching between that being disempowered or being empowered and trying to understand where we sort of positioned and lied the research intent and the research integrity that we wanted to do as part of developing those meaningful relationships. This important illustration speaks to the expectations placed on Indigenous research and Indigenous researchers in a marine context, or for that matter across environmental research approaches, and that is to reprioritise which relationships are valued in relation to institutional and research program expectations. The implication for the agency of reef traditional owners is that it can become stunted in growth or restricted at times when contending with the complexity of institutional priorities, research priorities, and researcher priorities. This is despite the prevailing awareness that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, reef traditional owners, First Nations peoples do have a right to pursue self-determination agendas across marine and terrestrial environments and have a choice on how our lives and our respective countries are managed, researched and governed. And so within this space, that notion of people of place, people of knowledge and people of science, how are those particular self-determination agendas being impacted and being supported, being ignored, or how are they evolving within the complexity of marine science research? redesigning relationships become a key priority in research project as part of a co-production methodology which was central to this understanding. Thinking about the institutional expectations, the research expectations, and how do we come to align those with specific community priorities and needs. This is something CSIP 09 aspired to in thinking about, well, what does that redesign process look like, and how do we ensure relevance and relationality with traditional owners. So the Yadaba Respect Protocol for Research and Management on Darumbal Country is part of that contribution here, and I certainly thank Harry over there for his salient contributions at the start to sort of socialise this understanding of Yadaba, connection with respect, and Brother Mal will speak to that further in thinking about how outcomes aligned with the principles of self-determination and contribute to a level of agency that accounted for the visibility of voice in all institutional arenas, so that Reef Traditional Owners could hold space and call to account the historical legacies of research, management and governance impacting country, people and knowledge and community. By holding space for the growth of Darumbal ontologies, in the context of this particular research model framework, or broadly Indigenous ontologies in research projects, the notion of co-production supports projects to realise a kind of unlearning process, to nurture growth of meaningful relationships and learn, to listen in culturally safe ways for the kinds of values that underpin relationships with country held by Darumbal elders. And so thinking about Darumbal ontologies, Darumbal axiologies, to think about how they centre and align those perspectives. But certainly our place as researchers, how do we engage with that at an intellectual and scholarly level through meaningful relationships? By listening to the kinds of values and research, the research across, under and over country predicts, we can possibly discern, for the sake of supporting Indigenous self-determination agendas, how research informs governance systems and the necessary changes Reef Traditional Owners call for across timelines and research priorities that don't listen or ignore the historical legacies of previous environmental social science research or research in general occurring across sea country. And so within this space, centering Darumbal values for the sake of understanding the connections with management, research and governance was something Mal wanted to speak to forthcoming. But certainly within this final slide here, how do we identify Darumbal country, Darumbal voice, certainly as part of this acknowledgement for all those that contributed to this project, the complexity of institutional representations, different lines of thought, different funding agendas, different Reef Traditional Owner groups. Today was about trying to amplify Darumbal into a space as a co-design partner to say, where do you locate yourself within this space? So Mel, as we set 4 questions, what kind of things can we consider for building relationships, maintaining relationships, designing relationships and sustaining relationships? We'd be keen to hear some of your thoughts now.
Thank you, Gurumali Dabu. Also want to acknowledge country and countrymen, and on land that we stand on here today to speak. Yadaba is a really important word for us. That's that place where we come together. Yeah, better stand in the light. Yadaba is that language there. So we share language of respect. Respect, not in the sense of that I need your admiration, but in the sense of knowing. In the sense of knowing that there's 3 important foundation pieces for you to understand about us, about country. Country, culture, and community. These things are intertwined, they can't live without the other. And connected to that is these long-held histories of knowledge, science, and that there. And we see these gaps. We see people knocking on our door for a little bit of one component of country, and we forget all these other things. and that. And sometimes we shake our heads, and with our elders as well. But Yadaba is that place where you understand, where you engage, where you invest your time to get to know country, and get to know those connections, because we're a holistic people. We're a holistic people of connected, and that's part of who we are. That's our being, our identity, and that there. And so when we ground that out, and at that same time, we move past that superficial element of acknowledgement to that of, yep, you're now part of the family. And we've seen it through the AIMS presentation. Leadership in that space, that's what we're chasing. And that then leads into things. It leads into governance, it leads into management, it leads into research. It sets up the roadmap. That's when we can start talking about your project. And so there's a journey of understanding the stories that's coming through. Understand the story, because in the stories, in the language, is the knowledge, and respect isn't yet to seek your credibility, about. It's our power play. There's no power play in here. This is about our responsibilities to each other, to country, to culture and community. We understand the change. We understand climate change. We understand all these things. We've seen changes in our country for long periods of time. And we're a value to everyone in the room here, everyone online, whether you're in the research area or in the management area, to work with traditional owners, to get to know them. And it's usually that space where it's often forgotten. We need people higher up the food chain to invest funding into your programs, to spend time with us, to get to know us, understand that front end piece. Then we can start talking about research agreements, partnership agreements, and all those things for shared outcomes, for shared benefits. Thank you.